Jesus' prayer in Gethsemane, recorded in Matthew 26:39-44, King James Version, takes place shortly before his arrest and crucifixion. In a moment of intense anguish, Jesus withdraws from his disciples to pray, expressing both his deep distress and his trust in God's will. Here is the passage, 39. And he went a little further and fell on his face and prayed, saying, O my Father, if it be possible, let this cup pass from me. Nevertheless, not as I will, but as thou wilt. 40. And he cometh unto the disciples, and findeth them asleep, and saith unto Peter, What, could ye not watch with me 1 hour? 41. Watch and pray that ye enter not into temptation. The spirit indeed is willing, but the flesh is weak. 42. He went away again the second time and prayed, saying, O my Father, if this cup may not pass away from me, except I drink it, thy will be done. 43. And he came and found them asleep again, for their eyes were heavy. 44. And he left them and went away again and prayed the third time, saying the same words. This prayer demonstrates Jesus' honest struggle with impending suffering, his sorrow, and ultimately his full submission to God's will, serving as a model for faithful prayer and surrender to God's purpose. The most significant part of Jesus' prayer in Gethsemane, Matthew 26:39-44, is his powerful expression of submission to God's will, even in the face of deep personal anguish. O my Father, if it be possible, let this cup pass from me. Nevertheless, not as I will, but as thou wilt. Matthew 26:39. This moment highlights several central themes. Despite his dread of the impending suffering, let this cup pass from me, Jesus places God's will above his own desires. His repeated declaration, not as I will, but as thou wilt, epitomizes total obedience and trust in the Father. Jesus openly expresses his sorrow and desire for another way, revealing his full humanity. Yet he ultimately yields to God's redemptive plan, displaying divine obedience. This prayer provides a model for all believers on how to approach God during times of distress, honestly expressing desires, but submitting to God's wisdom and purpose. In essence, the most significant part is Jesus' humble surrender, willing to accept suffering for the greater purpose of God's salvation plan, teaching that faithful obedience sometimes means laying aside personal preferences for divine will. The cup mentioned in Jesus' prayer in Gethsemane, Matthew 26:39-44, is a deeply symbolic image with layers of meaning drawn from both the Old and New Testaments. Old Testament symbolism. In Scripture, the cup often represents a person's lot or destiny, but most commonly it is a metaphor for God's wrath, judgment, or suffering. Prophets repeatedly use the cup as a symbol of the outpouring of God's wrath and judgment on sinful nations or people. See Isaiah 51:17, Jeremiah 25:15-16, Ezekiel 23:33. Drinking the cup means fully experiencing suffering or punishment decreed by God. In the context of Gethsemane, when Jesus prays, "Let this cup pass from me, nevertheless not as I will, but as thou wilt," the cup refers specifically to the suffering, agony, and the full measure of divine judgment Jesus is about to endure on behalf of humanity. The cup includes the physical anguish of crucifixion, the emotional pain of abandonment, and most importantly, the spiritual agony of bearing humanity's sin and taking on God's righteous judgment. Jesus is taking on the cup of wrath deserved by the world so that through his obedience and sacrifice, others might receive the cup of blessing. See also the symbolism in the Last Supper, Matthew 26:27-28. In New Testament layers, Jesus previously used this symbol when asking James and John, "Can you drink the cup I am going to drink?" Matthew 20:22, foretelling the suffering of all who follow him in obedience. Jesus' willingness to drink the cup signifies his complete submission to God's will, even to the point of death. It is an acceptance of the full weight of pain, separation, and sacrifice for the redemption of others. Dual nature of the cup. It represents both the bitterness, judgment, wrath, suffering, and the promise, redemption, blessing, fellowship, found throughout biblical imagery. By accepting the cup, Jesus transforms it from a symbol of curse into a symbol of salvation for believers. The cup in Gethsemane primarily symbolizes the suffering, judgment, and wrath that Jesus would endure for the sins of the world, fulfilling God's redemptive plan through his willing obedience and sacrifice. It draws on rich Old Testament imagery, signifying both the terrible cost of sin and the depth of Christ's love and submission to the Father's will. Jesus' prayer in Gethsemane, Matthew 26:39-44, remains powerfully relevant today for people facing personal, spiritual, or moral challenges. Here are key ways this passage connects with modern life. It is a model of honest prayer. Jesus openly expresses his anguish and desire, showing that it's okay to bring intense emotions and struggles honestly before God. Today, many find comfort knowing they can approach God without pretense, sharing doubts, fears, and longings, just as Jesus did. At the heart of Jesus' prayer, "Not as I will, but as thou wilt," is a timeless example of submitting personal desires to God's greater purpose. In a world that often values self-will and control, this passage calls people to trust and yield to divine wisdom, especially when outcomes are uncertain or painful. Jesus faced overwhelming sorrow and the prospect of suffering, yet did not run from it. Today, anyone encountering illness, loss, hardship, or tough decisions can draw strength from his example of courage and perseverance in the face of fear. It is encouragement in weakness, as shown when Jesus acknowledges human frailty, saying, "The spirit indeed is willing, but the flesh is weak." This resonates with those who set out with good intentions but struggle to remain steadfast. It's a reminder that weakness is part of being human and that reliance on God brings strength. It also illustrates community and vigilance when Jesus asks his disciples to watch and pray. This highlights the importance of community support, mutual encouragement, and spiritual vigilance, reminding believers not to face struggles alone but to encourage and pray for one another. We can also see hope and redemption as, though Jesus' prayer is full of struggle, it leads to the cross and ultimately to resurrection, signaling that God's will, even through suffering, leads to hope and redemption. In modern times of despair or suffering, this offers the assurance that surrender to God is never in vain. In summary, Jesus' prayer in Gethsemane is relevant today as a model of honest communication with God, humble surrender to his will, steadfastness through hardship, compassion for human weakness, and hope for redemption. It encourages people to pray authentically, trust God amid hardship, and support one another in faith. Thank you so much for joining me in this reflection on Jesus' prayer in Gethsemane. I'm truly humbled and deeply grateful that you chose to spend your time here, listening, sharing, and walking through these profound moments together. Your willingness to participate by watching, commenting, or sharing reminds me of the kind of community Jesus invited us to build, one rooted in honesty, perseverance, and encouragement, even in times of struggle. It is a blessing to be able to explore these powerful lessons of faith, surrender, and hope with you. I pray that, like Jesus, we find the courage to face life's difficult moments with honesty and trust in God's will, that we lift one another up with compassion and prayer, and that each of us may be strengthened to choose faith over fear, knowing we are not alone. Thank you for being a part of this journey. If this message has touched you, I invite you to share it with others, so that together we can continue to encourage, support, and bless one another. May you go forward feeling blessed, uplifted, and sure of God's presence with you every step of the way. Blessings to you all.